Without further ado, we're going to get into everything that's happening in generative AI, and super excited to welcome to the stage Alexandr Wang at Scale.
Hello, sir.
Thanks for joining me.
Of course.
All right, well, you're the data company. Have we run out of data? Has the internet been scraped? Is this the end because there's no more data to find?
Yeah, so the wall has been the topic du jour for the past few weeks. I think that, have we hit a wall? Like, yes and no. There's been a lot of reports of this. Like, it seems to be the case that we've hit a wall on pre-training. So the large clusters training on huge amounts of internet data, that seems to have genuinely hit a wall. But we haven't hit a wall on progress in AI. So where we continue to see forward progress and where I think we're going to keep seeing model improvement, evals climbing, the models continue getting smarter is in post-training and test time compute. So sort of the O1 style of model. There's a replication of O1 that just came out today from DeepSeek, a Chinese lab, which came in kind of record time. And I think that where at least I see a lot of where I'm quite optimistic for progress in the industry is continue to pushing on test time compute, continue pushing on post-training, but probably at the cost of sort of, leaving pre-training behind a little bit.
So, yeah, thinking about the wall, and I really jumped into the heart of it because it's such a looming topic. I mean, I guess my framework would be, do we run out of data? Do we run out of like techniques that we could sort of harvest? Or it's like scaling is still working and there's enough data, but there isn't the appetite to spend the money that it would take? Or like, is that how you would break it down? And which is sort of the weakest link in terms of development in foundation models?
Yeah, so maybe it's worth kind of if we zoom all the way out and take like a broader time horizon view to the AI industry. So modern deep learning started maybe about 2011, 2012 with the first deep neural networks used for image recognition. ImageNet was sort of, and AlexNet were sort of the original innovations in this area. So 2012 to 2018, which is when the first GPT paper came out and the Transformer came out in 2017, that was sort of this initial kind of pure research phase, effectively, of AI. Like, it was very unclear which exact approach of AI was going to work, and then we sort of landed on transformers and GPT as like the first paradigm. Then from 2018 till today, effectively, since very recently, it's just all been about scaling. And it's all just, we've taken GPT almost exactly, and we've just scaled that up dramatically. We've applied orders of magnitude more data, orders of magnitude more compute, and that's gotten us to the sort of GPT-4, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, Gemini 1.5 Pro paradigm. So that's gotten us to where we've gotten. And then now we're kind of like, there's a new shifting of the guard, and we're kind of entering a new era. So we're kind of leaving the sort of just scale it up, and generally speaking, you don't have to do anything that clever. You literally just scale it up to now there's like all these questions about where the next frontier of progress is going to be. And we've built up these huge clusters, these huge compute clusters. So we have plenty of compute. We've run out of internet data. So we've run out of sort of like publicly available data. And there's, so then there's like this question mark. We have this we have to enter this new innovation era.
You sort of get to see the future in a way that we don't, because you work with all these companies. Like, I guess from where I sit, it's like, oh, we only have sort of the early version of O1. We don't have GPT-5. Like, isn't a lot of the we're spending a ton of money on compute still to come? Is your answer sort of signaling that you think some of those models aren't coming or as exciting, or it's getting beyond the unreleased models we're hoping for? You think that next leap is where there's a challenge?
I think what we're going to see is the models are going to keep getting a lot better. So we're going to get better and smarter models. That's for sure. And I don't think that trajectory stops. What the shift that's happening underneath all of that is, how is that happening? And generally speaking, and a lot of this has been recently reported, the sort of like the place where the industry is squeezing to get that progress is shifted from pre-training, which is lots of internet data, maybe trying synthetic data on huge clusters of GPUs towards post-training and test-time compute, which is more about, smaller amounts of data, but is very high quality and very specific. This is a lot of the data that we generate is used for post-training and test-time compute. It's leaning more on reinforcement learning within test-time compute environments, and it's pushing in this kind of like in this totally different direction. And so there's like some of these reports that like internally within the labs, it's sort of this feeling of like, oh, maybe there's like a very meaningful shift in what being a frontier AI lab means. As a result of all of these things that are happening, as a result of the pre-training wall that we're seeing. And so if you go one layer deeper, I think kind of one of the interesting questions is investment into production of frontier models is increasing exponentially. It continues to increase exponentially.
Well, that's the funny thing about the wall. It's like, okay, we're pouring a bunch of money into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so then there's like this weird thing, which is a lot of the investment paradigms and a lot of the ways that the labs and the big, the megacorps were spending their money was based on a belief that scaling would hold, that just scaling pre-training would hold. If that assumption is no longer correct...
Are you saying that it's no longer correct?
I'm saying there's been reported evidence that we might be hitting a wall on
which you find credible.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest question in the industry right now. Let's put it that way. Then the sort of like investment strategies and investment portfolios could be totally off. And it's a strange thing because we're gonna keep seeing progress. So if you like zoomed all the way out and you're like, okay, the AI industry is this black box. We put hundreds of billions of dollars on one side and on the other side, like smarter models get pooped out. Like that's okay.
That's the headline.
That macro black box is like healthy and good. And then if you like dig in, you're like, like the assumptions are changing, and the way that we're going to drive improvement of the models are changing, and maybe we don't need some of these mega clusters. Maybe we actually need to do something else. Maybe like we need to spend more on like innovation or research or data or whatever the other levers are.
All right, I want to talk about scale some, and I think part of why I'm pushing you on this is you've been very prescient about sort of seeing what the waves are, leaning into them, monetizing them, like sort of revenue almost like being so strong it's unwieldy. I mean, you clearly, my sense of the history of scale, it's like you saw self-driving happening, you threw the humans that those companies needed to support it, and then you saw LLM sort of coming ahead of and shifted some of your business there. Yeah, is that what lesson did you learn, I guess, from that period where you were like, okay, should we lean into LLMs or hold fast to the self-driving work we've been doing?
Yeah, I think that one of the major tenets that I've tried to run scale with is we are an infrastructure company for AI as a technology and AI as an industry. AI is like an incredibly frenetic industry and has been for the past 15 years. There was all this excitement originally around image recognition, then there were GANs, then there were, we had like recurrent neural networks, which were exciting, but then we went back to image recognition because of self-driving, and then we went back to like transformers and GPTs. And so there's like, now we're going back to robotics after like robotics was out of vogue for a while. Like the industry itself is just fundamentally very fast moving and very volatile. And I think what we have a responsibility to do as a company is like stay ahead of what we think the mega trends are going to be. And I think that it was, as it became obvious that LLMs and scaling were going to work, I think that was like a clear mega trend to get behind. As I personally predict forward or look forward, I think that, we're currently in the midst of a major transition from pre-training to post-training and test-time compute.
And what's Scale's role in this post-training world? Like can you just give me sort of a case study of what you're actually doing there?
Yeah, so the first form of post-training that really became quite popular was RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback, which was research. The original experiments in RLHF we did with OpenAI in 2019. when they had on GPT-2. And so where in the world of generative AI, where our data foundry and our infrastructure is actually most relevant is in post-training to like basically produce smaller amounts of extremely high quality data that fuel these, like soup up the models from the, I think this is a term you use, soup up the models from where they are after the large pre-training phase. And so frankly, what we expect is what we do to become kind of critical as the industry is sort of hitting this data wall. You know, the data foundry that we've built, we think is one of the major mechanisms that we have as an industry to build our way out of it.
I guess, you know, sort of an intuition. Like on the one hand, it's like the internet is so big. Like how could you ever compete with sort of manually, no matter how optimized you are, sort of harvesting data relative to that? And that would just seem like, oh my God, that's tiny relative to it. I mean, one counter argument that I've heard is that we're entering this phase of we want to see like processes and like how people do tasks, and that's just been something that hasn't been inhaled on the internet, and so we need to sort of simulate that. Or how do you think about this big question of like you need to sort of produce something almost as valuable as the internet to move things forward?
Yeah, so I think the core is what you just talked about, which is like we're not really trying to compete with the internet. Like we're not trying to produce data that already exists on the internet. Because if it exists on the internet, to your point, like, you know, the models are pretty good at it. But what's needed are what are the capabilities that you're just not going to learn from the internet. So one of them is as we move towards agents is agent data. So and the process data that you're talking about. Like the internet has shockingly little data of humans carrying out actions and then documenting their thought process as they go through that entire procedure. So, you know, even the process to like book a flight and be like, oh, I need to book a flight, I need to check my calendar, I need to ask my friend if that flight, if like this timing works for them, and I need to check to see that like I don't have a meeting, and you know, that entire thought process is like not documented. That data does not exist. Other data that don't exist are, you know, complex multimodal data doesn't really exist on the internet. You know, different kinds of an understanding of how to deal with these multi-turn conversations doesn't exist on the internet. But at a very broad level, like our whole strategy and our thought process is, you know, we're not competing with the internet, we're augmenting the internet.
All right, just quickly, like applications you're most excited about next year. What do you think we're really going to drill into in terms of the most useful applications in AI?
I think one, you know, it's like such a mainstream belief, but like obviously agents is like this huge question mark. And I think that fundamentally, because agent all of a sudden means everything,
right?
When everyone says they're going to launch agent products, I think it's like not clear exactly what's even going to pop out the other side. But there, I think there is like definitely we're at this moment where like the technology is very, very powerful, and there's like somebody who's going to nail the product experience to make. There will be like a ChatGPT moment, let's say, of agents. Maybe not quite as.
But agents broadly, or like agents in coding, agents in law, or like is it going to be like ChatGPT where that's, you know, one text box to rule them all, or is it sort of a category specific agent?
That's a reasonable question. I think my guess is you'll have a generic agent that becomes pretty popular. Yeah.
The totally shifting gears. I mean, you guys do a lot of business with the government. I feel like you're. What is your sense of what the Trump administration will mean for AI and for your business? Like, yeah, how much were you worried about sort of the regulatory environment and potential Harris administration, or just what's your read on how what's happening in AI is going to interplay with the new administration?
Yeah, I think that the philosophies are just almost diametrically opposite on AI. I think that the Harris administration was likely the Harris campaign was likely to be much more concerned about risks associated with AI, and you know, obviously not holding back the industry, but trying to have smart regulation to prevent that. You saw that with the AI Safety Institute, and the, you know, AI Executive Order, the National Security Memorandum. Like these were all things that that administration was focused on. I think my understanding, and we'll see, but the Trump administration is much more accelerationist, and fundamentally, don't want to constrain this technology. And I think from a foreign policy standpoint, I would say there's going to be, I think they take the risks, the general sort of like bucket of geopolitical risks of near-peer competitors, and
it's worse if we fall behind than if we
yeah
let America run too wild, basically.
Yeah, I would say, in a nutshell, I think that China, let's say, is probably the primary adversary, so to speak, and that the United States needs to not fall behind. It's hard to predict exactly, because I don't think anyone could have predicted all of the appointments necessarily that have come in.
Do you worry, like Elon, he's building AI companies, is so specifically close to Trump? I mean, I think there was a report that the Sundar at Google called, and Elon was like hanging around. Is it hard to build a direct relationship with the administration if Elon's sort of hovering around, or how do you navigate that? You work with XAI? I don't know. I don't actually know where you are in the Elon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the, I think in a general standpoint, like it's hard for the U.S. government as a like actual government body to like legally play favorites to one company or another. Like that is fundamentally something that's very hard for the government to actually do. So I do think that, like, to the degree that there's sets of regulations that are sort of like that are accelerationist for AI, I think those will benefit the entire industry. I definitely think, I think it's very important that the new admin takes the China risk very seriously. I think it's like a quite shocking realization that, O1, obviously an innovation that came out of a US lab, the first replication of O1 is out of a Chinese startup, not out of any of the big American companies.
Do you not work with China at all, or do you have a hard line?
We don't work with China at all, yeah.
Was that a tough decision?
No. In fact, quite easy.
Do you see much, you think there's a pretty firm wall, or do you see some Silicon Valley cross-pollination?
Well, that's a complicated question. Certainly there are a large number of, like, there's a lot of people who are born in China who are working at all the major labs and are contributing quite visibly to a
certainly
lot of
information flow is happening.
I don't, like, who knows? My guess is that Chinese intelligence are pretty good at their job. So I think there's like, I think China as a real competitor on AI is definitely true. Like, China is definitely a very real competitor, and we need to take that risk very seriously. And the sort of, in general, the kind of alliances that are being formed today, if you look at sort of this, like, the axis of authoritarian regimes, Russia, North Korea, Iran, China, it doesn't bode super swimmingly for sort of like continued world peace and the continuation of democracy necessarily globally.
People, to go back to sort of your business, people compare Scale to Palantir, I think favorably in some ways, where it's some of the skepticism of Palantir hasn't sort of been merited, where it's like, okay, we're putting a lot of humans, we're supporting people doing big projects, obviously we're working with the government. Like, I don't know, are you okay to be sort of, we do some consulting, we do some services, or that sort of classic critique that it's not software? Like, how do you think about that, and what's your thinking around that?
Yeah, I think that there was an investor who I spoke with years and years ago who sort of, they were talking about, I was sort of asking their advice on, like, oh, how do you think about, these businesses and these other businesses, these higher margin businesses, these other businesses, and they kind of made the point that, like, what investors think are cool or not cool is like fashion, and what you should care about is building a business that you believe can generate huge amounts of profits in the long run, and if you do that, then, like, everything will take care of itself. And I think that's been quite true of Palantir. I think that Palantir was sort of the broad investment community was extremely skeptical of Palantir for years and years and years. But it turns out that what they've built is an incredibly profitable business and deserves, a premium multiple. And like, I think the same way about our business. I think there will invariably, over the course of, we've been around 8 years, we'll be around for decades longer. Like, invariably there will be a lot of haters in the investment community who will have whatever justification for why we won't be able to generate profits in the long run. I think we're going to be super profitable in the long run. And the other thing I'll mention is, as we think about our business, the integration of humans in the loop and experts in the loop is as fundamental to AI as an industry as oxygen. Like, data is the raw material for intelligence. That data has to come from sort of human experts. And so we believe that in the long run and in the fullness of time, it'll be obvious that this infrastructure that we've built over the past decade is fundamentally critical to AI thriving and surviving.
Perfect. Alexandr Wang at Scale, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.